This is my logistical video, and we are going to take a little trip back to old Broken Bow, Oklahoma, right here. And what I'm going to discuss that happened when the 83rd Group Army of the PLA, along with its PAP brethren, were in position in their new AO, which encompassed a quad state area, is they established their FOB here, among many other units establishing other FOBs at other strategic locations, such as airports and such around the area, municipal airports, and whatever other types of areas suited their needs. Logistically speaking, they wanted major control over key roads that they could bring in their supplies. Like here in Broken Bow, they wanted, of course, Route 259. And what this also did was it bisected areas that they could clear. Once they controlled a route, going this way and this way, they could establish checkpoints along it. And when they wanted to clear it, what they would do is they would send a bunch of units like so and push up into partisan areas and clear them out little by little before taking the road back and going back to the FOB. That was your typical valley clearing operation of the Western Valley that's often discussed in the story, just to the northwest of the town of Broken Bow right here. Now, going into it, initially speaking, when the town was being captured, what you had was a series of delaying actions being fought all around the town and even inside the town itself, because of course you had your people that didn't want to leave their homes, and they ended up going down with the ship, so to speak, proverbially speaking. Like so. You have these PAP troops clearing a house here, tossing a grenade into that bedroom where that guy is. Essentially, you had a lot of that going on, and you had the delaying action, of course, along Route 70, where you had the leading two tanks of the two tank columns being ambushed by Americans in ghillie suits, some homemade, some not, that popped up out of the tall grasses and tossed Molotovs after their barrier was being run over by the tanks, which they did on purpose to slow the tanks down. You have to remember the partisans' commanders were a lot of war veterans and other people that had experience and knew what they were doing and how to lead the people. You see the partisans on the ridge back there shooting, trying to hit the turret gunners so that the Molotov guys can get a good hit inside the hatch. Essentially, while those delaying actions were occurring here in the west, like so, you had the partisan logistical trains escaping the town, getting away from the PAP forces pushing up in their rolling shields and doing their clearings of each building. You had people fleeing the town with all manner of logistics. They had their vehicles loaded down with everything from food, water, ammo, medical, tools, weapons, and miscellaneous items that they felt would be important, like blankets and, comfort items and what have you. Now, they headed north initially to the woods by the lake, where they set up their first base camp, which ended up being overrun during Operation Skull-bsh, but for the time, they were relatively safe there, as they escaped the town being encircled by the Chi-Com Arm0red Battali0n and the PAP companies that were pushing up through and taking prisoners and slaves and also doing executions and such. But the hazards while escaping in the logistical trains for the partisans were a lot of aerial hazards, because what you had was a Nanchang Q-5 come in and strafe and drop munitions, like so. Like you see this car that just got utterly annihilated, like mentioned in the story, and you see it dropping a few. What it's doing is it's doing a dive and coming up, releasing its free fall munitions to hit vehicles and things down there. I did the best I could with the drawing, but you can see them going up the hill into the foothills, into the mountains, into the Ozarks here. There's a bunch of vehicles trying to escape. You see them, some are pickup trucks, some are cars. But anyway, they're loaded down with logistics, things that these people would have needed. And when they got to their new base camp, they used the cabins as makeshift surgical places for the doctors and people of that profession that got there, and also people that were willing to help them tend to the wounded, because you have to understand the battle that unfolded created a lot of wounded people, people that needed emergency medical care. So they used the cabins as makeshift field hospitals, and they used them also as some logistical storage until they could actually dig their Viet Cong-style tunneling systems like I showed you in prior videos. Now, they would have stored their logistics underground to where they would have been safe from any potential air or artillery strikes, and that was a big thing with logistics, is safe storage. Now, you see, they would have used the same types of things, technicals or just even regular trucks. People could load down ATVs with supplies, horses, whatever they had, they used. Now, when we talk about the enemy FOB, we talk about their logistics. Now, the invaders would have had things like weapons, ammo, shells, rockets, mortars, spare parts for other vehicles, tools, food, water, medical, generators, plumbing supplies, portable structures and the supplies, and electrical parts, and also miscellaneous items of all sorts. You know, everything down to like light bulbs and things like that. You would have had stuff like that. Major logistical hauls. And again, these routes were required to bring in logistical trains. Like here's an example of one coming down 259. You have escorts and you have trucks. You have an IFV right here. You have two trucks here. You have a few more IFVs, and you might have some more trucks behind them and more IFVs. It's a convoy with escorts, because you would have armed escorts on a military convoy that would bring in supplies, and they would be using major roads like 259 or Route 70 that goes this way, east to west. So you would also, because it's an airport, and the invaders would prefer airport FOBs because they can easily bring in troops and supplies by flying them in. You see this cargo plane coming in for a landing here on the airstrip. You see the guard tower, the HESCO barrier wall with razor wire on top. You see this concrete T-walls with razor wire as a partition to separate the airfield from other parts of the FOB. You see all these cargo containers. This would be like where they would store logistics, but that might be where they just offload them off the plane for temporary storage until they can move them to sandbagged, more secure places with more HESCO walls, like a FOB within a FOB, That would be where they would safely store them. And if you remember in the stories, for a while there, the FOB was safe and it wasn't being hit by any type of mortars or anything like that, because the partisans didn't have the ability to get in close to strike the FOB until they temporarily took Millerton. Now this green is the areas that partisans operated in almost with impunity, but the red is areas that were under firm Chi-Com control. But that's not to say that partisans didn't go into these areas, because they did. They temporarily took Millerton. They took the dam and Hokotown and their old base camp. They took that back toward the end of the story. I mean, the Chi-Coms eventually came in and wiped them out and pushed them out again. But for a little while, they took it over and used it to hit with the 2 howitzers they managed to take from the overrun base. I mean, but they also attacked and freed the Wee to the Gers from this Lao guy here in Eagletown when they had their first successful hit-and-run raid on Eagletown. I mean, because that's just the nature of that type of warfare, where you have insurge and you have partisans against an occupation. And then, of course, you would have the occupation forces striking back, pushing up the valley to clear it. And you'd have, people like Spetsnaz doing special operations, landing to capture key partisan leadership, and like they did at the mountains at the end of the valley and up here. You would have had all that going on, because that's the reality of that type of warfare. Those are the types of operations that occur. And logistically speaking, you can bring in a lot of logistics into a FOB that has an airstrip, because you can fly it in and also you can drive it in. Both are very important methods, but the partisans, logistically speaking, would also be hitting softer convoys with less armed escorts, or convoys that they set up elaborate types of, ambushes from like the woods, or like from the sides of the road. Air is a little bit more difficult. You can't strangle really any kind of air transport unless at like the end where they did the mortar strike on the airfield. But that was because John and his elite team were able to manage that type of a strike. But you generally, you know, would have those sorts of things going on, and you would have air threats to logistical trains for partisans, not for the invaders, of course, but for partisans. They would have to worry about aerial threats. They would have to worry about, you know, ground threats as well, but that would come from a lot of your, you know, special forces or your armored forces, like here at the Battle of Route 259 before the town was captured. You can see them all fighting here. And that